for our next in line webinar. Today is something really interesting that you've taken. Uh, Looks like privacy is really catching the world by a storm, and there is the HIPAA, which is there on most of the companies' front line, especially from the pharmaceutical and the health industry. So we got a lot of queries because we do a lot of assignment for our US-based clients, and the queries are basically targeted towards how do you conduct a HIPAA risk assessment, because that's one of the key requirements when you're doing HIPAA compliance. So we thought of doing a webinar on that. So I really hope this is useful and helpful to you. Firstly, am I audible? Can you hear me? Can you see me? If you can, just drop me a word in the chat so I'll know that you can hear me. Okay, super. Thank you for the confirmation. Sometimes, like, we've been facing some difficulties to go to meeting for the past few sessions, and I was trying to be extra careful on this. All right. So let's move ahead. And as you go ahead, if you face any difficulties, any issues in hearing me, seeing me, or whatever, just drop a message. Our tech team is waiting to, take this thing ahead. And unfortunately, sometimes I tend to talk a bit fast. So if you want me to slow down, do let me know that part also. All right. So that's about me, actually. I've been in there for almost 30 years now, and almost 20 years I've been with VISTA InfoSec. It's my own company, and we do many things in data security, like 27001, PCI DSS, PCI SSF. I myself a QSA, QPA. I'm also an SSA, SLA, and stuff. So that's what we are. I don't want to talk much about my company. Let's just move ahead. We have been there in many countries across the world. They're in India, Middle East, US, UK, Singapore. And that's our YouTube channel, and I'm putting it in the chat also in case you would like to go through it. All our prior content is on that channel, and we keep on updating fresh content very often, maybe 2 or 3 at least a month. So do subscribe in case you haven't. And by the looks of it, we are the most popular channel on the internet on YouTube for compliance services. So I hope you're there on it. Anyway, moving ahead. Now, you do get CPE points for attending the webinar, and just to be very clear, you have to attend the whole webinar. And because sometimes you get queries from whom you submitted your CPE. If you attended, we can respond in the affirmative. Secondly, please don't write to me for a CPE certificate. We don't. We are doing this webinar for free, and we've got hundreds of people attending the webinar. We cannot literally possible to spend more time and resources in generating certificates. It's very well admissible for you to write in your CPE submission for that you attended our webinar. You don't need to show a certificate at that time. And in case the organization like ISC2 or ISACA or anyone has a query, they can write to us and we will respond back to them. Okay. And as we go along, do type in your queries in the query box, and we'll answer as much as possible along the way. And in case not, I will definitely write back to you after the webinar is over. Sometimes you get just too many questions, and it's not really possible to do all of them. And also suggest topics that you want to be taken up in the future. We do consider that when you're deciding on what topic to take ahead in the next session. And we very much value your feedback. Towards the end of the webinar, there is a survey that will be shown to you. Please do fill it up. It will hardly take you 2 minutes, but it will give us a lot of insight on your likes, dislikes, and what we did right and what we did wrong. So do fill it up. It really helps. A word of appreciation will go a long way. All right. So now this webinar is not about HIPAA. So in case you would like to know what is HIPAA and get the basics right and how it works with other standards and all, go head out to our channel. I've already put the link in the chat box. Head out to our channel. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. And secondly is that also there is a playlist called as HIPAA. In the HIPAA playlist, you can see like a dozen videos on HIPAA. You can always go through it. Right. So this is not the basics. This is not covering all the bases of HIPAA. So we are covering some parts, but not all of it. So HIPAA is a federal law in the United States of America for protecting patient healthcare information. Any idea what is the full form of HIPAA? Anyone? You can just type it in the box without doing Googling it, please. Put it in the box. Let me see. Without Googling, how many of you can actually give me the full form? Come on, come on. What is the full form of HIPAA? Wow, that's good. Okay, almost all of you got it straight, and it is Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. That's great. So, as the word suggests, it's for health insurance portability when you're moving across providers, and accountability that whomsoever has the data is accountable for the data. Okay, somebody's typed that he can't see the chat box. The same thing, like you can click on the questions part and you can put it over there. There's a chat box also over there. It looks like a, the drop down is written as chat. Anyway, moving ahead, it applies to all the data. It applies to all clinical data, medications, insurance, billing information, SSNs, birth dates, everything is covered. And then violations can lead to heavy penalties, fines, and possibly termination of employees or shutdown of his service or even arrest. So this is a federal law, so be very careful with it. It's not like a standard like ISO or PCI, it's a federal law. There's a difference, right? So it's a HIPAA is an act, it's not a standard like a PCI or an ISO or an NIST, right? Of course, HIPAA does set the standard or the benchmark for protecting healthcare information. So there are 6 key rules in HIPAA: privacy, security, breach notifications, transaction, unique rules, unique identifiers rule, and the enforcement rule. So the first 3 are the one that is addressed the most, and it is thought about and taken into consideration the most. So privacy rule basically is for who must follow the HIPAA and what constitutes or protected, what means by protected healthcare information, PHI, and how the PHI can be used and disclosed. That is the PHI. That's the privacy rule. So what is the privacy data? How it can be used? How it can be disclosed? Under what circumstances it can be done? That is covered under the privacy rule. And then there is a security rule that this sets the standard for the safeguarding. So okay, first in privacy rule there is a definition, and then in the security rule how it can be protected. So whether it is in electronic format or in the hard copy format, or includes data encryption, passwords, access control, encryption, everything comes over there, even other cyber security measures. And then there's a breach notification rule. This is the third and the most important rule of HIPAA. And this outlines that in case there is a breach. So first we define what is meant by privacy data, HIPAA data. Second rule specifies how it can be protected, safeguarding the patient data. Third is in case there is still a breach, what needs to be done? Who needs to be notified? And what about the health services? So how the breach notification. So in case there is a breach, how you need to manage. So the 3 stages of data management is covered over here. The next are, of course, the add-ons to it, but these are also important, but not, I wouldn't say at the same level of importance as the first 3 rules. There's a privacy, security, and breach notification. But again, that doesn't mean that you can bypass these rules or these are not of consequence. Okay, this is also very important, so pay attention. Then there is a transaction rule. So this governs use of. I've covered this in detail in earlier webinar, so you can go to it. For the accuracy of the PHI, so how the codification of the data needs to be done over here. Then there's a unique identifiers rule. So how those entities needs to have an identifying number or identifying code for the HIPAA regulated transactions. This is what it is. So what data comes from where, and what is entity has given what data to you from which, say, insurance company or which hospital or which pharmacy the data is covered. This unique identifiers rule covers that. And then there is a the enforcement rule. So this was added later on in 2015, much later addition, because more than 10 years back, the HIPAA had come into existence. It strengthens the privacy and the security rules. Now there is something called the business associate. So business associates comes into the scope. Then further down, if there is the outsourcing that happens, how will that be managed? That all comes under the enforcement rule. Otherwise, only the first level companies were looked at, and otherwise, nobody would really look at the down level companies. So with this enforcement rules, even that came into existence, even that came into focus. So HIPAA risk. So now coming to the subject, what is a HIPAA risk assessment? So it is required as per 45 CFR 164.30. That's a article number within the Act itself. 45 CFR 164.308 brackets A brackets 1 dot A dot 1, whatever. So it is required to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of the potential risk to EPHI. Now, if you know what is a risk assessment all about, then this will be a walk in the park for you. Then again, assisting healthcare providers, business associates, and healthcare product companies, that becomes the next step. And then, of course, ensure PHI protection to prepare for the OCR audits and verify product compliance. Now, product which is working in the environment. So you cannot have an unsafe product working in the environment. So the entire risk assessment of the entire ecosystem which comes under the scope of HIPAA is called as a HIPAA risk assessment. The steps, if I might be very practical in this, is the same as conducting a normal risk assessment, but the focus here is on the HIPAA identified assets. So this is meant for carrying out for the internal audit for identifying potential security breaches and enhancing the information security. And then you do the risk analysis again to identify PHI areas, because see, when you're doing a risk assessment, the first thing that you have to do is identify the assets and the processes in scope to which the threats, vulnerabilities, and the breaches are possibly can impact. Then again, assessing the security measures, evaluating the potential threats and their impact. And then last but not the least is the risk mitigation, that is providing the remediation recommendations. So the key components, there are the 3 levels of the HIPAA risk assessment. Again, this is mandated by them, so you have to pay attention. Administrative, physical, and technical safeguards are there. So the focus is on these 3 areas. Yes, so the first point is there is someone who's pointed out very well. That's the first point already related to EPHI, right? Meaning physical PHI is out of scope. Yes, so this is mostly related to the EPHI, the first point that we discussed some time back. That's why it is written as EPHI, electronic, health information. So, okay, these are the various, I could say, articles within the standard in itself, within the act in itself, and where the risk analysis is required. So, and as you can see, under the security management process, risk analysis is required. Then there is a assigned security responsibility. This is all required standards within the administrative safeguards. So these are the 3 safeguard levels: administrative, physical, and technical. And under the administrative safeguards, these are the controls that has been identified against in the administrative safeguards. So for that, what is the risk areas that needs to be identified? So under the physical safeguards, under the administrative safeguard, these are the various control requirements. One is the security management process, assigned security responsibility, workforce security, information access management, security awareness and training, security incident procedures, contingency plan, evaluation, and business associate contracts. The last part that is written, the business associate contracts, this is was added later on. Earlier, otherwise, when the act was actually written, the business associates, that is the downstream vendors or partners, were not really covered very much, I can say that. And if I do draw a parallel between this and say information security, typical, the overall cyber security, information security, administrative safeguards are more on the policy procedure front and the people management part. Typically those safeguards come over there. If you've done your CISSP, then you know what I'm talking about. And again, there is a facility access controls, workstation use, workstation security, device and media controls, access control. Now the next part is the technical controls or the technical safeguards. And here comes the technical controls or technical processes, technologies comes over here in technical safeguards. So here is the access control, audit controls, maintaining the integrity of the data, then person or entity authentication. You understand, right? Identification, authentication, authorization, all covers over here in the technical safeguards. And then there's a transmission security when the data is being transmitted, whether they are transmitted in a safe manner or not. And so this is what the administrative safeguards. If you look at the summary over here that we have put, there is a security management, what to do with them, assess the risk, mitigate them, respond to incidents related to PHI. Then information access management, what we saw earlier with the control numbers. If you see over here, yeah, information access management, as you can see over here, IAM. So what is covered over here, we have put, and then the workforce management and training, and then there is a continuous evaluation. So that people are more in touch with what's happening and they are aware of what's going to impact them. So then it cannot be a one-time thing, that is you just roll out HIPAA compliance once and you're done for life. A continuous evaluation process is required as a part of the standard. Under physical safeguards, this is also very important. With regards to access control, access control, there will be user authorization, password handling, auto log off, session timeouts, all those things will come over here. Even the user entitlement review, that user access rights review. Then there's a transmission security when the data is being transmitted from one entity to the other. It could be downstream or upstream or on the same level. Now, audit controls is there, ensuring that this becomes a part of the detective control, that is audit controls. In case there is an issue, then do you have the data to check from where this happened, how it happened, and what needs to be done about it. Then the integrity controls, quick detection of breaches and protection against PHI theft or alteration. The technical safeguards, again, are from the technical standpoints with regards to technology oriented controls. So here there is a facility access control for the facilities that house PHI. Then for workstation and device security, there is the endpoints. And here we see the consequences of HIPAA breaches. So 10 million was the average cost of a HIPAA healthcare data breach in 2022 as per IBM. $10 million was the average cost of a healthcare data breach. That's where they have asked and mandated for a HIPAA risk assessment to be done. And there's got various impact with regards to financial and also reputational impact. So it's not just you pay the money and get it over with. Companies will think twice, people will think twice before working with you if there is a data breach. And then again, 86% was the increase in cyber attacks on the healthcare industry in 2022 compared to 2021, almost like a doubling of the impact on organizations. And as you can see, education and research, government, military were the most targeted organizations for this for HIPAA. And so why is it important? First of all, it is mandatory and it helps you. So it's not really a choice. It's not really whether you want to do it or not. So identify the threats. The key word should be over here, to proactively know your PHI risk and potential data breach threats, and then protect your reputation. Baseline and security, that is setting up a benchmark. This is a minimum we'll be doing as an organization to protect the patient data. Then improve on the solutions. Many companies would like say roll out a firewall 10 years back and they are still there. So improvement of security or the solutions is also very important, and that's where this thing comes in place. Then compare and comply, ensure your safeguard meets the HIPAA requirements. Then there is a breach likelihood. There is assess your current setup or the current situation for a PHI breach, and then continuous improvement, fix the issues, and of course, last but not the least, outsource is also allowed. Is also could be a good way in which you can outsource or offload your risk, but you have to ensure that your partner is also HIPAA compliant. It cannot be that I gave it to somebody and he said he will do it. No, that person also needs to be HIPAA compliant. It is your responsibility to ensure that to confirm that they are HIPAA compliant. Remember, this is not a standard, it's an act, it's a law of the land. Then how do you go about conducting the HIPAA risk assessment? There are 9 steps to be thought about. Define the scope, gather the necessary data, and as we are going through this webinar, we'll be going through each of the step in detail. So define the scope. For any sort of assessment that you're doing, defining the scope becomes the most important thing that you can do. What technologies, what people, what processes, the PPT needs to be identified. People, process, and technologies needs to be identified, and the HHS has suggested have all these are the steps that they have asked for. Have all the PHI sources within an organization been identified? It cannot just be that somebody told you and you did it. There has to be something like a responsible process that identifies all the PHI sources in the organization. Now, are there external PHI sources where you are receiving data from? And what threats could impact your PHI containing systems? This all would constitute your scope. So first, identify the sources, internal and external, of HIPAA data, HSS, HIPAA data in the organization, and even from outside coming in. And then next is, from what areas are you expecting possible threats to your organization for your HIPAA data? That also becomes a part of your scope. Then gather the relevant data. Now collect the relevant ePHI data and understand related workflows. So you have to collect all the relevant data to understand where and how ePHI is being used and transmitted. So it cannot just be in one area. It is basically from where all you are getting the data and how the data is being used, right? And then gather a thorough understanding of the workflows and process involved in the handling of the ePHI. I would advise you to get this done from your internal departmental heads. Get your product head, get your departmental heads to explain this to you, hopefully with a presentation. Do not accept this otherwise. Okay, you see from here the data goes and it goes to the left and then it goes to the right. You will make a mess. Ensure that there is a documented data flow design of your processes, workflow. Once you've identified the data and the processes, then you identify the threats and the vulnerabilities. So the threats, it could be deliberate actions, means intentional or unintentional. So somebody could unintentionally click on a phishing link, or somebody could intentionally zip the data and send it out to someone else. So these are the intentional, unintentional parts. And then there is a technical failure. Like, let me give an example. Until a few years back, people were still using and thinking of SSL as a gold standard for data encryption transmission. Suddenly, one day it got hacked and everything fell down. So that's a technical failure. The encryption got compromised and you couldn't upgrade in time. So those things are there, whether weak password, improper disposal, unidentified assets. So for example, you have data on one server, but because the data was getting replicated to another server, the data went over there also, but you were not aware of this replication, so it just took data server 1 in scope, not data server 2. That's like unidentified assets in place. Then of course a disaster, the uncontrollable possibilities of flood, fire, earthquake, or a terrorist action, all those things are there. Wildfires, office fires, floods, hurricanes, everything comes under disasters. And then assess the risk level. For each of your assets, you've identified the data flow, identified the threat, the vulnerability, and now the risk level comes into place. That is identification of what could be the potential impact in case there is a, this thing comes to pass, or in case, there is the threat occurrence happens, then what is the possibility? How often do you think it can happen? And what could be the impact on organization in case it happens? So on a 1 to 5, that's where the impact is measured and the likelihood is identified. So we have given the possibilities of 1 to 5. You can even have a 1 to 3 ka grade. So 1 being very unlikely and 5 meaning very likely. You can even make it the other way around, 5 being very unlikely, 1 being very likely. No, that's not the way to do. Typically speaking, it's from the less to more. So 1 could be very unlikely, 5 could be very likely. So you can even have 1 to 3, 5 being one very unlikely, 3 being very likely, and the second level being mid likely. So all those things are there. That's something that you need to work it out with your organization. We help many companies do that, and we have seen that some companies are using 3 because they're doing it for the first time, and some companies, they're already mature, so they need to have more interesting insights into the data. So the 1 to 5. So it depends on how you want to do it. And this is how the matrix look like. There is the impact versus likelihood, and you can have, say, the top 3 on the right being like the red areas, like the heat chart as companies call, and the second level, the medium, coming over here, and the low, of course, that can be disregarded or taken into consideration at a later time. And then the level of risk. Now risk is a probability, remember that, right? So the risk levels for the threats and vulnerabilities. In case a particular threat vulnerability pairing comes to pass, then what will be the impact? Then determine the risk by analyzing the likelihood and the impact. So again, that this needs to be done in a formulaic manner. It cannot be done like, okay, I think the risk of this is very high, so I'll put down high over here. No, you need to have a calculation in place, right? A calculation that takes into consideration the asset importance, the likelihood, the severity of the damage, which will then give you the risk levels. You cannot have a risk level that is done arbitrarily by the person who's doing the risk analysis, right? So you can, there is a HHS method also for averaging out the likelihood and the impact. You can check it out on the HHS website also. And of course, you need to document the risk level and the corrective action once the risk have been identified. Now, then after that, the gaps and the corrective action. So once you've done this, identifying calculation of the risk, and then evaluate the effectiveness of the security measures, any in place as of now, record any discrepancies. So you might have a logging system, but the logging system is actually useless because it barely logs any data and doesn't generate any reports. So the control is there, but the control has failed. So you need to identify gaps like this also. Then assess the measures for protecting the PHI. Thoroughly document all the implemented measures, right? And then align with the current practices and then reevaluate to address. So a base system has some threats and vulnerabilities acting on it. So for example, a laptop or a database or an application server or a web server connected to the internet is possible for being hacked because maybe some patch is missing, or maybe the hardening has not happened properly. So those possibilities are there inherent for any system. But then what happens is you might have a firewall in place, you might have a WAF in place, or you might be doing hardening, you might be doing data encryption. So these are the controls built on top of this asset to protect the asset, right? So when you're doing the actual calculation, first you'll calculate what could be till here, what could be the risk faced by the organization without those assets in place. Then with the corrective controls in place or the controls implemented for protecting those assets in place, and then if there are still any gaps, and then recommend corrective actions. Document everything. The entire steps has to be documented with evidences that you've actually done the evaluation. It cannot be just a sign-off sheet saying that we have done the HIPAA risk assessment and there are no high-risk areas. That's not acceptable. An entire risk register has to be made for HIPAA. Then document a risk management plan. So once the risk have been identified, the mitigation strategies needs to be outlined. The security parts for the protection measures needs to be outlined. The action plan, who will do it, when will it be done, how will it be done, all those things needs to be identified in the action plan for each risk. And then this needs to be reviewed on a regular basis. It could be weekly, it could be fortnightly, but it needs to be reviewed on a consistent basis. And of course, last but not the least, senior management involvement is mandatory. It will not happen otherwise. Then implement the plan and regularly review it. It cannot be just a one-time thing. So once it is being implemented, review the plan. As they say, plan what you're doing and then check what you have planned, whether it is done properly, appropriately or not, right? So HIPAA doesn't specify frequency of the assessments, whether it is annual or biannual, but you need to do it at least once a year. Now, what are the challenges? The number one thing that we have always seen is a lack of expertise. It is highly recommended to get an outsider. Don't get it done by internal, otherwise, because it's an internal asset, the value of the person doing the asset might not be doing the assessment, might not be appreciated by the company. That's why many companies call in legal outside experts like somebody like us to do the assessment, and then we work with the internal champions to get it done. And of course, the limited resources, complex regulations are there, competing priorities, because the people who will actually be doing it internal to your organization might be having 20 other things also happening. Vendor management, the complexity of the data and evolving threats. New threats are being introduced on a daily basis. So this also needs to be taken into consideration. And then, of course, we have drawn up a chart of HIPAA risk assessment versus the risk management. So one is for identifying, we just put it over there, you can go through it in detail. One is for identifying what could go wrong, right? That's if I can summarize this whole sheet. So one is the process for identifying what could go wrong with the system, the people, process, and technologies. And the risk management comes later on when you've implemented the controls, and then ensuring that those controls are being managed and working in an effective manner. So it is not just like a one-time thing. So there is if serially, if I put down chronologically, there is HIPAA risk assessment, then the risk management comes into place. But then as a part of risk management, new risk can be identified and it becomes like a plan, do, check, act cycle in place. So identifying the threats, how can you go about identifying the threats? These are all the various questions that we have faced in our client interaction, the client assignments that you have done. So very important to study the data breaches, past incidents and trends to understand vulnerabilities. Now, you might have clients or you might be a company where you've not faced any data, hack anytime in the past. Now, to you, I can say that there's a high possibility, with due respect, there's a very high possibility that probably you're not even aware that your data was lost somewhere. That's also a possibility. Okay, I'm getting a point away that my voice is too loud. Can you hear me, or do I need to reduce my mic level? Can you just confirm whether you are able to hear me in a clear manner? Okay, okay. Thank you so much. Okay, because my platform gave me a notification that your voice is too loud and people might not be able to hear it. Okay, someone asked a question. Is it when it says billing, is it aligned to PCI DSS in any way? No, no. Billing information means XYZ person, what medicine that person purchased from which store. That is billing information. So that is confidential information. The person paid using a credit card. So the credit card information needs to be protected. That is not coming under HIPAA. That is coming under PCI DSS. I hope that makes sense. Now, insider threats is the worst part. That is people inside the company knowingly, unknowingly making a mess. Malware and ransomware, just too many attacks coming up. So many companies are losing their data getting locked down. So malware and ransomware again could be is a very major source of threats to any organization. The loss of stolen device. We hear about instances where somebody has HIPAA data on their laptop and the laptop got lost. So those things is also something that you need to consider when identifying threats to the organization. Unauthorized access, business associate risk. I keep on repeating this part, business associate risk. So this is the risk by people down the stream. So you have your data. So you have your HIPAA data with you, and you onboard other vendors to help you process the data or do whatever is required for the principal. Those are your business associates, the BA as it is called. There is a format for the BA agreement also that is mandated by the HHS. And both the principal, the primary company and the business associate are responsible for protecting the PHI. Then there is a compliance gap, regularly conduct HIPAA audits and risk assessments. Now, how do you turn this threat into opportunities? So having a risk management program will really help in defining the roles of who's going to do what, when, where, how, and all. And a systematic approach. That is, it cannot be at random. Earlier, it used to be at random. That is, people would, okay, my data can be stolen. My data, maybe somebody can guess my password. They'll come up with some random thoughts on what could be the threats facing the organization. And that's where the systematic approach was very important. That's where the HHS has also released, this is a good point. The HHS has also released a security risk assessment tool. This is a free of cost tool that the HHS gives to the fraternity to the organization that you can download and use for doing a HIPAA risk assessment. Then identifying the ePHI assets, document all system or devices storing or processing the PHI. Then analyze threats, assess risk, considering weaknesses and external threats. That is for the analyzing the risk. Then prioritize the risk. Of course, once you've identified the risk in a very objective manner, you can say if a risk is falling between 60 to 80 to 100, it is high risk to be done immediately. 40 to 60 to 50 to 80 could be medium risk, and anything below 50 is low. It is up to you how you're prioritizing the risk, but you need to have an objective grade for that. And then, of course, implement the safeguard as per the risk identified. Documentation, again, I'm coming to it, extremely important that you document everything. Monitor and update, that is regularly monitor and update your risk management program. Expert guidance. If you're doing it for the first time, better you have someone like us to help you out with the HIPAA risk assessment. And last section of a webinar is the HIPAA assessment FAQs. We are now documented a few of the frequently asked questions. So what is the estimated cost range for conducting a risk assessment? Again, this is a this is one of the first questions that we get asked, because they do this for many companies. And again, it depends on the scope, the amount of data, the number of locations, what applications, everything. There are too many variables. So we have a scoping sheet for that. But in any case, the prices are very wide ranging. It can go anywhere from $4,000 to $50,000. On an average, it will take you like 10 to 15,000 minimum for doing an effective HIPAA risk assessment. And then difference between HIPAA risk analysis and risk assessment. So it's a larger part. HIPAA risk analysis is the larger part of a HIPAA risk assessment. So risk analysis specifically evaluates the threats, probabilities, existing vulnerabilities, and potential threats. But assessment is more on the scoping side. So identifying the people, process, technology, the users, handling the PHI, all that comes under the HIPAA risk assessment, doing the policy review, doing the report generation, doing the security testing. Whereas the HIPAA analysis is for actually identifying or evaluating the threats and the probabilities and the existing vulnerabilities. So that is the actual, risk calculation part, or the meat of the risk register that comes from the risk analysis. So how often is it required to be done? They don't mandate a frequency, unfortunately. But it's up to the organizations to decide. But we always suggest do it at least once a year, because that's what almost all the standards mandate, whether it is PCI or SOC 1, SOC 2, or even a GDPR, or even an ISO would say that. So comprehensive risk assessments are recommended. So if there is a change in your process, if there is a change in an algorithm, if there is a change on what data you're doing what with, then you need to do a rerun of the risk assessment. So what should it include? The HIPAA risk assessment. So we have put down the few sections over here. So the brief overview of how it was done, then what was the scope like, what techniques and tools was used. You can very well write over here that you use the HIPAA given tool, HHS given tool, and the techniques could be interviewed, it could be visited to the site location, all those things could be the techniques. Then what are the PHI safeguards in place that needs to be documented? The potential threats and vulnerabilities faced by each of the policy or each of the processes and assets needs to be documented. Then the ranked risk and the measures to address the risk identified and the vulnerabilities. Then what constitutes a technical and non-technical? These are again a question that we get asked frequently. So technical safeguards are all the technical controls, technology oriented. So it could be the hardware and software for securing, like encryption, authentication, transmission, all those things comes up over here. It could be even your logging, monitoring systems, all that comes as a technical safeguard. And non-technical would be more the operational controls, the policy, processes, trainings, people management, all comes as a non-technical, if I may even call it as administrative controls. So where are risks commonly identified? So this is everybody asking, where do you see this risk coming up? So again, we can't give a very clear-cut answer because it depends on our organization. We have seen small companies very well organized, having many things in place when you see large companies struggling. So we can't even say anything just by looking at a company. But if I can say this, small companies become more secure because they know that they are in a larger risk. So if you need patient data, you might as well, try to hack into a local polyclinic rather than trying to hack into a large hospital group. You'll not get through with the higher with the larger hospital group, but there's a high chance that you might get through to the local polyclinic. And then, of course, the data stored on the cloud. Many a time we see patient data being lost because there was some S3 bucket on AWS and people did not put a password over there. Now, that is not a problem of Amazon. That's not a problem of how the S3 is actually designed. The problem is yours because you designed an S3 bucket without a password. So those are the areas where we see majority risk. So then who's responsible? The HIPAA compliance officer, in case you have one. Or it could be a security officer that you have one, or you can have a contract with an external party who will do this for you on a regular basis. And then how do we contribute? Then we can help you with the identification of the organization's PHI, the end-to-end identifying of your critical assets, its flow, then doing the actual risk analysis, the risk assessment, and then even recommending to you strategies for the closure of the identified weaknesses. Okay, that brings me to the end, and that's our YouTube page. That we've identified. There's a LinkedIn page, there's a YouTube page. Do go through it, and you can also subscribe to it or follow the channel. And then, of course, as we're ending, a general reminder about the survey. We are slightly more than allotted time, but I really hope that was fine with you. Then there is a general reminder of the survey. Please do fill up the survey sheet, whether it is positive or negative or whatever be the case, or even suggestions for the next webinar. And that's our contact details. We are there in UK, US, Singapore, and of course India. And you can of course let us know if there is something that we can help you with. And if there is any query, I would love to take it up, or we can end for the day. So thank you again, everyone, for your precious time, for your valuable time. I really hope this was worth your time. I look forward to seeing you again in another exciting webinar coming up next month. Take care and God bless. Bye-bye.